Good day. Today is the 4th of July, and may I therefore take this opportunity first, before I begin this program, to congratulate all people in the United States on US Independence Day. Independence Day from Britain, a world-shaking event at the time, and of course the event which led to the creation of a extraordinary, wonderful country with which I have strong bonds of affection. Now, in many programs, as you all know, I've been very critical of some aspects of US policy. I hope I've also made clear in many programs that that does not extend to the United States in general or to the American people either. Well, having discussed the United States, I'm afraid I must now look to a less happy or much more unhappy country, which is, of course, again, Ukraine, where the war continues. And I have to say that since the collapse of Ukrainian resistance in Lysychansk, and since the capture of the entire area around Lysychansk by the Russians and their allied forces, there have been some very strange articles, at least strange to my mind, appearing in parts of the Western media. I've been reading articles about how the fall of Lysychansk is no big deal, that the place wasn't strategically important, that the Ukrainian troops carried out a tactical withdrawal. That, by the way, follows on from what President Zelensky of Ukraine, has himself been saying. He says that he gave the order, that the Ukrainian High Command gave the order to withdraw from Lysychansk in order to spare the lives of the soldiers who had been heroically defending the city. And that, of course, has been widely repeated in the Western media. And I've been reading things about how the Ukrainians successfully wore down the Russian advance through their weeks of resistance in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. Now, I'm going to be straightforward and say that I find all of these claims, all these articles, all these commentaries that I've been reading in various places, I'm not going to pick them all out. It's not difficult to find them if you want to carry out a few internet searches. I have to say that they all seem to me extraordinary exercises in denial. If Lysychansk and Severodonetsk were so unimportant, why did President Zelensky himself say just a short while ago that the fate of eastern Ukraine would be decided there? Why did the Ukrainians, in fact, continue resisting for so long in both of these places and actually send reinforcements there to hold on to them long after whatever possible attrition on the Russians, which is the general justification one hears, long after that attrition obviously was starting to work against the Ukrainians instead. In fact, as I've discussed in so many programs now, to the extent that there's been attrition in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and indeed, in fact, there has been to a very great extent, it's the Ukrainians who have suffered from them. They have taken by far the heavier losses. They've lost substantial amounts of equipment. They've also been driven out of a series of towns, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, the area round about, which formerly was part of a major a major population and industrial hub in Donbass, which of course was itself, in a sense, Ukraine's major industrial hub. So these exercises in special pleading, as it's also, it seems to me, concerning the fall of Lysychansk, well, they've all been, it seems to me, a good example of people who are now heavily invested in the narrative that developed in March of Ukraine winning the war, they are now coming up with all these explanations and rationalizations, and I have to say, explanations for why things are turning out otherwise. Now, in the hours since the fall of Lysychansk, there's been reports that the Russians are now approaching the town of Siversk in northern Donetsk, which was one of the places to which the Ukrainians are supposed to have been pulling back to from Lysychansk. And I say pulling back, my understanding is that we're talking mainly about small groups of Ukrainian soldiers who've fled the city and have withdrawn along country roads towards Siversk. And it seems that in the days leading up to the fall of Lysychansk, but in clear anticipation that Lysychansk would indeed fall, Ukraine rushed reinforcements to try and hold Siversk against the follow-up offensive that the Russians were bound to launch. Well, it seems that the Russians are now almost in Siversk. There's some reports which I can't confirm and which I'm a little skeptical about, given the distance between Siversk and Lysychansk, that there's already fighting going on in the place. There's even some suggestions that Siversk might actually fall fairly soon. If the latter turns out to be true, then it would suggest that the Russian offensive in Donbass is now building up very, very strong momentum. And it would also suggest that the Ukrainian military in Donbass is now definitely on the slide. However, before I say that that is the case, I'd like to see some more evidence first. As I said, the reports that I'm getting about fighting in Siversk itself seem to me to be fairly scattered and perhaps not entirely convincing. But anyway, that's, it seems to me, where we are. Elsewhere, Ukraine has tried to, in some ways, offset the damage caused by the loss of Lysychansk. Apparently, some Ukrainian troops or people were sent to Snakes Island, from which the Russians withdrew a few days ago, and raised the Ukrainian flag there. This is after the Russians demonstrated their ability to cause massive damage to any Ukrainian installations on Snakes Island by bombing the place extensively. So it's probably only a token gesture, but, you know, why not? As I said, why not raise the flag over this territory from which the Russians have withdrawn if you can? I don't think it has any significance. And we've also seen more attempts by Ukraine to launch offensives in Zaporozhye region, near the town of Ugledar. Apparently that offensive has been stalled and thrown into reverse, and there's been some more fighting near Kherson region, where again the Ukrainians have made various attempts to launch attacks, only to be heavily shelled by the Russians and pushed back. Now, in my opinion, these counterattacks by the Ukrainians are a huge mistake. They result in heavy losses of men and materials. The Ukrainians are not in any position at the present time to launch counteroffensives. I've given up counting the number of Ukrainian counteroffensives towards Kherson that I've been reading about. They extend all the way back to mid-March. None of them, it seems to me, have achieved any success, and all that they've done is they've caused Ukraine heavy losses. Perhaps one day some kind of Ukrainian force will be cobbled together strong enough to make a real impact in this part of Ukraine, though I have to say I'm skeptical. But in any event, for the moment, it's clear that Ukraine is not in that position. All the indications, on the contrary, are that the situation in eastern Ukraine, in Donbass, is heading ever more steadily in Russia's favor. The Russian general who was responsible for the capture of Lysychansk, General Lapin, has now been given the title of Hero of Russia. And it seems to me that the Russians look to be on a roll and the Ukrainians look to be in a state of probably irreversible retreat. So the war is not going well for Ukraine. But if the war is not going well for Ukraine, it's also starting to go badly wrong, or increasingly wrong, for Ukraine's Western allies. And a whole series of decisions or steps or news has trickled out over the last couple of days, which appear to confirm this. Firstly, the Russian government has now taken over the giant Sakhalin-2 liquefied natural gas facility on the island of Sakhalin in the Far East. Now, there was heavy Japanese investment in this facility by Mitsubishi and Mitsui, and Sakhalin-2 was providing Japan with liquefied natural gas. Now, Japan is a country which historically has been very, very short of natural resources. It has to import its oil and gas and other energy products. Of course, its nuclear industry has been in some degree of, shall we say, confusion since the Fukushima accident of a decade or so ago. And as a result, the Japanese have been importing an increasing amount of LNG, and that's why they've been investing in Sakhalin-2. So the Russian takeover of Sakhalin-2, which looks like it's likely to boot out Japanese investors, something which, by the way, amounts to a hardening of Russian policy towards unfriendly countries, as they define them, which is to say countries which have imposed sanctions on Russia. Well, this action has caused alarm in Japan, and it has caused concern that LNG supplies to Japan might start to fall. And we've now had statements from Japanese executives that if that were to happen, it would cause very severe problems for Japan indeed. But Japan's problems are probably still, to some extent at least, in the future. Germany's problems are happening now. For the first time since 1991, Germany has recorded a monthly trade deficit. Now, there's going to be lots of discussions and explanations as to why that is so, but there is no doubt at all to my mind that it is due to two critical factors. One is surging energy, the surging costs in terms of energy imports, and the other is a collapse in demand for German exports from elsewhere within the European Union. The first points to growing pressure on German industrial producers as their energy and costs rise. The second points to recession across the European Union, which will of course hurt German industrial producers and exporters even further. And all the indications are that Germany itself, now the economic motor of the European Union, as it is sometimes called, is now on the brink of recession and may actually be in recession. And this comes shortly after the head of the German agency that keeps track on things on the state of German reserves of gas. Mr. Mueller has come forward and has said that if Russian natural gas supplies to Germany were interrupted, then Germany only has 2 months of gas supply to get it through the winter. And that, of course, assumes a normal winter, not a severe or harsh one. And we've also had another report from JP Morgan. JP Morgan, US bank, has unpacked Janet Yellen's global oil price cap scheme. And JP Morgan has said that if it were to cause the Russians to stop exports of oil, which they might do and could afford to do in response, then oil prices would rise to $380 a barrel, which, to be straightforward about it, would be crisis levels. So we are increasingly seeing that the economic situation is getting more and more bleak. If we come back to Japan, I'm going to say something else. If Japan has difficulties with energy supplies, and this causes Japanese industries to start closing down, then that, of course, is going to complicate supply problems further across the industrialized world. Japan remains a major exporter of industrial goods. And, of course, if Germany goes down the same route, then the problems will start to multiply. And here we get a report that the head of the German Trade Union Federation is now giving warnings that whole sectors of the German economy are now at threat of closure. This situation is becoming unbearable. It is becoming impossible. We haven't really hit the really bad period of this economic crisis yet. We're still some months away from this, but already huge amount of damage is being done as a result of this economic war. My own personal view is that sometime around late autumn, early winter, perhaps a bit later, with the military situation in Ukraine going ever more unfavorably for Ukraine, and with Europe quite possibly in severe economic crisis, there's going to be severe political consequences for those European politicians that have hitched their countries onto this ride. And that is perhaps the least of it. If we see a major economic recession in Europe, if we see an economic crisis of some sort in Japan, be under no illusions. That is going to affect supply chains. It's going to affect the United States itself, even to the extent that the United States is or believes itself to be self-sufficient in most goods. We will start to see major problems multiplying across the world economy. It's extraordinary to what extent Western leaders remain delusional about this. I've been reading articles, even by people like the economist Jack Rasmus, who is, I'd say, more on the liberal side of things, and certainly no great admirer of President Putin and his government, who spoke about how the gold import plan and the oil price cap plan floated at the G7 summit meeting, how those plans were so nonsensical that they made him question the basic competence of Western leaders. There's been a fascinating article in The Hill, which is a US political affairs magazine, which gets published in Washington, and which is very much a go-to place for sort of political information, if you like, about what's going on within the political system in Washington, and one which in consequence is widely read by the US political class. Anyway, it's a very interesting article written by a person from the global south. I'm not exactly sure who he is, but anyway, making exactly that contrast that we've made on the Duran, Alex Christoforou and I, contrasting the coherent approach to policies that emerged in the BRICS summit of last week, and this extraordinary delusional combination of policies, mix of nonsensical policies that came out of the G7 and NATO summits in Europe. And this person, whoever he is, seemed to say that from the perspective of the global south, it's hardly surprising that the BRICS at the moment seem to be offering so much more than the old G7, than the old Western powers. And I think that this view is starting increasingly to gain hold and to gather traction across the world. And this, again, brings me back to my earlier point. The window of opportunity to resolve this crisis in Europe in some sort of way that will avoid a total debacle is closing. Kissinger, about a month ago at the Davos meeting, said it would be open for about 2 months, and we're already a month away from that point. We have to, in the West, it seems to me, start thinking hard about the kind of decisions that we can make in order to turn the situation round. And certainly, it seems to me that this unholy alliance of neocons in Washington, people in the European Union and elsewhere who are, as I said, acting out their particular pathologies and phobias where Russia is concerned and perhaps where fossil fuels are concerned. And, of course, the current Ukrainian government. This unholy alliance is causing almost massive damage to Western societies and conceivably to irreparable damage. It will become irreparable the longer it continues. Now, the military facts on the ground, as I said at the start of this program, point clearly in one direction. So do the economic facts on the ground. People across the global south are seeing this. Perhaps let's be a little bit more optimistic than Kissinger. Let's say that we have until the end of August, but that isn't that long, 2 months at most, and then it could be that the situation becomes irretrievable. Certainly, it seems to me that something has to be done about the current incumbent in the White House, who is clearly unable to chart a different course from the disastrous one he set the West and the United States upon. Now, how that is going to be sorted out in the United States itself, I leave that to the American people and their political class. As I said, today is the 4th of July. It's not for me to advise the Americans how they should sort out their own internal problems. But let me repeat again, time is short. If Siversk does indeed fall, if the Battle of Slavyansk is indeed underway, as other reports are saying, if it really does appear that the whole of Donbass is about to come under Russian control very soon, if we see further setbacks for Ukraine, perhaps in Kharkiv region and elsewhere, And if Germany goes into recession, and as the German trade union chief tells us, whole industries in Germany start to close, and if we start to see supply disruptions in the Far East because Japan can't get its liquefied natural gas situation, then come the autumn, be under no doubt about it, we will be in a position where it is the Russians who will be simply dictating terms. Whether that's what we want to bring upon ourselves, well, I leave that to the Western political class to think about. Anyway, that's my view. I've said it out many times. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. I think it is perhaps a point that needs repetition. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon for further programs, both on this channel and on the Duran. Remember, you can join us on various other platforms, including Rumble and Locals and SuperU and ODYSEE and others. You can support our work via Patreon and Subscribestar, and you can also, of course, come to our shop, buy the great things we have there. And of course, today being the 4th of July, I have my American mug with the American flag. And last but not least, please remember to tick the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. More from me soon.